Everything running there. Okay. Okay. So if you are able to go on mute, if you're not, if you've got some background noise, that would be great. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Paige. Good to see you as well. So great to see so many familiar faces. Thanks so much for joining. We're going to kick off now. So my name is Saad. I run a company called Manage a Kind. So we do a lot of leadership development training, teaching leaders how to be accountable, compassionate, business minded, lots of soft skill, that tough conversations. And because of the focus on business, we thought it would be good to. I also run the L&D Shakers new learning cluster called L&D Means Business. I know most of you would already know that, but for those who are watching and perhaps don't know, so that's a little bit about me. Hand over to Jess.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jess Almley, and I've been working in this L&D field for, I now just ticked 30 years. So I've done, I like to say, all the jobs, and I'm located in the US here in Phoenix, Arizona, right in the desert. And my big focus is how we can really work in L&D now as strategic business partners. So I love, love, love this conversation. Can't wait. Passing it over to Rashi.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having me, Saad. My name is Rashi. I'm based out of Toronto, and I work with McKinsey and Company, which is a global management consulting firm. Within McKinsey, I kind of lead a global portfolio in our Leadership and Development Center of Excellence. And prior to taking on this role last year, I used to be a consultant on the road, and I've served businesses on, a host of topics, right from like growth marketing and sales, product management, experience to that people ops topics. So just excited to be here with all of you, and thank you for joining.
Really excited. So today's topic is on cultivating a consultancy mindset. We've been inundated with people asking us for lots of different things, practical examples. So we won't be able to necessarily get to everything. So we've done two things since we went live with this workshop. We have created a consultancy guide to touch on things that we might not be able to get through today. We're really practical case studies and examples on how to measure impact and the five consultancy areas, which if you received my newsletter earlier this week, you would have seen what those were all about. So we've done that. We're going to release that at 45 minutes past. So hang around. I promise you it's worth it. The second thing that we have done is we are launching a consultancy clinic. So this is a fireside chat. So we're going to have a conversation. But feel free to take notes, of course. There's no slides. We're just going to have a conversation. And the consultancy clinic, though, is where we, really deep dive into case studies. You bring your own problems, reactive course requests that you're getting, and how can you link things more to business goals. And that will be a 90-minute consultancy clinic where you get advice and practical tips and techniques. So we've done that. I will tell you a bit more about that towards the end of this fireside chat. The format is, excuse me, we will have a great, exciting, exhilarating conversation with Rashi. I'll be co-hosting with Jess, and we will take it in turns. We'll have some great questions for Rashi. We'll do that for 25 minutes. Feel free during that segment to ask any questions in the chat, and we'll make sure that we'll pick them up and put them to Rashi, or maybe even Jess and I might be able to chip in with an answer. So that's the next 25 minutes. After that, we'll have about 15-minute open Q&A for anything you want to talk about. You might have a challenge. I've got this tricky stakeholder. What do I do? Or talk to me a bit more about that thing you said earlier. Feel free. So get your questions ready for that 15-minute Q&A. And then I will end with a few next steps, including sharing a quick whistle-stop tour of the guide. And then I will share it with you in the chat as well, the PDF. So lots of tips. How does that sound? Give me a thumbs up if everyone's excited as we are. Yeah, let's go. Let's go. All right, so let's kick off. Really looking forward to it. So Rashi, thanks so much for doing this again. I've learned so much in our pre-meets and in preparation for this. And for those who don't know you, say a little bit more about yourself and how you got to where you are.
Sure. So I'll keep it pretty tight and short, but I like to say that I've had, inspired by Taylor Swift, I now tell people I've had eras in my career. So I started as a management consultant, kind of pivoted into sports marketing, was an agent for athletes, then did another pivot into the world of design thinking. So I was working with a boutique design thinking firm, did a lot of marketing, sales, advertising experience work, and then found myself in McKinsey post my MBA, did a pretty random walk. And at some point I'd reached that point in my career where everybody was telling me, you've got to kind of start focusing and specializing on something. You've done all this like random walk. And as I thought about the through line, initially I thought it would be something in growth marketing and sales, but when I stepped back, I was like, it's the people and people topics that I'm really passionate about. And then I also realized that generally the people function, but especially things like learning and development are at a very interesting inflection point where a lot of my skill sets from, say, being a strategy consultant, understanding marketing, understanding product management could actually be used in the function to just change how we work. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about how I found myself in the world of L&D. And unlike Jess, who's done this for 30 years, very honestly, I've been a practitioner now for about a year. So be gracious. I know I'm an outsider, but hopefully, I bring in some interesting perspectives.
All got squiggly careers. I mean, I was in higher education, then I went into commerce, had revenue targets, and now I'm able to do a bit of both, a bit like you, and we benefit so much from that rich insight. So we talked a bit about, McKinsey is obviously a global player in management consulting. And I wanted to almost give a spin because we hear a lot about performance consulting, which is a key term in the L&D profession. What do you think? How would you describe what a management consultant does and their role?
Sure. So in classic, I guess, management strategy consulting style, I'll say three things, right? I think the first big thing is that you're expected to be an independent advisor, which means that you're the one who's supposed to bring an outside in kind of perspective, and you're supposed to have some deep expertise to be able to challenge something, right? Like you're supposed to be objective and not really operate from a sense of bias. And so that's one, be an independent kind of advisor. The second kind of thing is that you're supposed to be a client counselor and you have this obligation to dissent. What that really means is you're empowered to ask hard questions that maybe leaders themselves are not asking or are afraid to ask, or folks in their team are afraid to ask. And then the third thing really is to sort of diagnose. I wouldn't use the word problems, but diagnose issues, understand situations, really get into the crux of like why something is being asked or suggested, and then recommend your solutions, right? And which in some cases could also be that this is not the solution. The other thing that I always like to tell people is, those are the three things, and it's different from being a staff augmentation support, right? Your job is not to just go in, get a lot of things and just do it and do it faster. There are obviously organizations and people who do that, but your job really is to be this kind of independent strategic advisor who can push back, question things, diagnose things. So I mean, the way I explain it to my own my 4.5-year-old, 5-year-old daughter is that think of us as doctors for businesses. We can sometimes be specialists, sometimes we can be like a GP, and we don't always have to be brought in when something's wrong. You can also be just brought in with the usual health check to make sure things are going well, but it's really like being a doctor for a business.
Such a good point because I think if I hear right, management consultancy, is all about looking at the business problems, not the learning problems. And problem isn't necessarily, as you say, a negative thing. It could be an opportunity. It's just, a dilemma, as something that's happening. And what I also, when we were talking earlier as well, it's a lot about looking at it from the lens of operations, right? Like of the business and what's happening in the industry as well. And that's very different, I think, for L&D colleagues who we are very much thinking about experience, which is important, and learning, challenges. But we also need to think about first the business challenges.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even just say business, I would say just stakeholders, right? So
Hmm.
like the word customer centric when they say, and your customers are the learners, but sometimes it's the learners and customers, right? So for example, if you're doing something for say a contact center, right? You're helping the agents get better. Your end stakeholder, one of the key ones is your agent. So you've got to understand their reality and what matters to them. But then also the impact they have is on the customers who call, right? And so it's a little bit of like, not just from an ops point of view, but really understanding where is the actual kind of impact coming from and then working backwards from there versus being inside out saying, this is a learning problem. This is how you can design the best sort of solution, and then giving it and stepping back and saying, my job is done.
And I know we're going to uncover a bit of a more practical example of how you've applied consultancy and addressed the kind of a business challenge a bit later. But bringing that to life when you're taking that outside perspective inside and you're looking at customer challenges, could you bring that to life for us a bit? It could either be something that, like, as you're because you work a lot with training the management consultants that go out into the world and work with big brands and clients. I mean, is there any example you can give or anything that comes to mind where someone is taking that, has taken that mindset to unlock something that wasn't even seen perhaps as a problem by the client, or they weren't taking a customer lens, and it kind of just unlocked this different kind of conversation?
Yeah, so without obviously getting to specifics, and I think looking at it broad and holistically, we obviously get a lot of people in from, say, undergrad universities, MBAs, etc., and have to train them up to become consultants, right? And so a large part of, even with our early tenure colleagues, the things that we do when it comes to skills is we take people completely greenfield with low exposure to say maybe these skills and help impart some of these consulting skills. So before I took on my current portfolio where I kind of globally lead the end-to-end team leader learning journey, which is about 5,500 colleagues around the world, I was looking at our individual excellence or our individual contributor journey, which is about 10,000 people across the world. And some of the big gaps there was, how do you actually teach them to go into situations really quickly where they may have very little understanding of the situation and ramp it up and learn how to even problem solve, right? Like, how do you learn problem solving as a skill? And so we've got a bunch of these interventions where people go through in-person experiences, then there are on-the-job aids, etc., created and loops created very quickly to teach them how to do this, both formally through like a formal learning intervention, but also then making sure that their own direct sort of managers, etc., giving them the right apprenticeship, mentorship, coaching on these things. So it's I think that's an interesting example without getting into specifics, because this becomes sort of our colleagues who are part of a lot of our teams that actually go out there and work through some of the most complicated, ambiguous, messy problems, and we've got to ramp them up very, very quickly.
Yeah, and so for those who just some people have just joined the session. So, what would be the top three skills then for someone who's trying to act like a management consultant?
Yeah, so I think the first big skill, I mean, it's really a people business at the end of the day. So I say, call it collaboration skills, call it relationship building skills with like three big stakeholders, right? One is obviously your clients. So you've got to really understand how to build a certain trust-based relationship with them where you can, like I said, ask them those difficult questions, give them that independent advice, and work with them to really like feel like, they trust you and you trust them. The second stakeholder becomes your own immediate sort of leaders in an organization, right? Sometimes it can be the same people. It's not an external client, but the thing of upward management, working with other stakeholders and other different kind of functions, etc. I think that's a pretty important skill. How do you make sure that they're sort of bought in, they understand what you're doing, and they as they have their conversations, they don't think of you as a siloed function, but like invite you onto their seat, the seats on their table, and really make you feel like part of the whole. And then I think the other big stakeholder also for a lot of folks, if you're not, just working by yourself, is your own team, right? How do you work with your team? How do you collaborate? How do you break things down so that different people can work on different parts of the puzzle? And then how do you bring it back together? So that's really big, like relationship building and collaboration. The second big is communication, right? It's how do you synthesize things? How do you communicate things? How do you make people, actually, it's one thing to put something on paper and say, this is a great strategy. It's a very different thing to actually get them to do it. So communication is really important. And with that, I'd say is also this ability to problem solve, right? Which is how do you take complex challenges, break them down, develop hypotheses, test them, go back with it, make a recommendation, and help someone kind of go on that journey with you towards change. I think those are like some big kind of skills that you need. And in all of this, right, sometimes this can be very stressful. And so I always say, don't put yourself last. And self-regulation, the idea of being able to lead yourself, managing your own energy, constantly sort of learning, developing, upskilling yourself is also really important, right? So I'd say three big skills that help you do the job better, but it all also comes down with this like big foundation of, are you also taking care of yourself, both, the mental, emotional side of it, but are you also focused on your own kind of upskilling and learning and development and building your own expertise?
Let's stick with problem solving. because it's the starting point, right? As a management consultant or as a strategic consultant or performance consultant. And feel free people to share in the chat, like what's the blocker, right, from us staying in the problem space. So for me, I have an execution bias, right? So I just want to go and create the damn Myro workshop. I'm just so I can already visualize what the training's gonna look like, and I just want to get in. And so that for me, I realize is my Achilles heel. That I need to stop doing that, and I need to just start asking more questions. What would you advise? What would be your tip for someone who, I mean, maybe even it's a personal thing for you. Like, did you face any challenges in trying to, like, any habits that you had that prevented you from staying in the problem space?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to give a recommendation. I guess for me, because I grew up in this world, I have started my career as an analyst at a
Hmm.
management consulting firm right out of undergrad. So I think it was just drilled into my being that you don't jump into doing ASAP, even though there's this default for bias. You always kind of step back. It's like a spring, right? You slow down to go fast, and doing a proper strategy or a diagnosis phase is just very, very important, right? So I think a lot of us have a default to bias, and a lot of times we think that especially in different functions, that we are rewarded for our throughput rate, right? But you've got to tell yourself this is not a factory. The speed at which you get something as an input and you take it to output is not actually what success really is. It's to solve the right problems, and it's to make sure that your limited time energy goes into the right things that can actually move needles and have impact. So I always tell people, look, whenever someone comes to you with a question, maybe just break it down, right? Say there's going to be a little bit of a diagnosis, like this is how you work with us. There's going to be a little bit of a diagnosis phase. We'll sit down and we'll analyze the situation. We'll ask you a bunch of whys. We might want to shadow a couple of your teams or wherever this problem is coming. We want to talk to those actually people who we're designing something for. Then we're going to do a design phase. We'll co-create that design phase, right? Like we'll have a hypothesis that this might, and maybe by the way, at the end of your diagnosis phase, your answer recommendation could be this is not a learning problem. You need me to make a course, I can make a course, but nothing's still going to change. You
Mm.
tell me, is it a go, no go for resources, right? But let's assume what you did identify was a sort of learning problem. Then say we're going to do something in a design phase that's going to be co-created. That's where you bring in your stakeholders together, so your leaders, kind of show them your work in progress material. Don't go into a black box and design a solution, but kind of the way software engineers build, like take them on versions, have those minimum lovable or minimum viable products, and also test them with learners, right? Like say we've got 5 of these people out of this population of like 1,000 people who we were designing the intervention from. We're going to use them as a test group and get their reactions, right? So that they tell you if it's working, not working, what's resonating, what's not. And then you say, okay, there's going to be a sort of like a deploy phase, right? After that, where we are going to deploy, we're going to track and make sure that what we said is going to, the impact that we said we want to have, we are going to sit and watch and see if it's happening. If it's not, we can still kind of make changes. So I always call the first kind of deployment as a pilot, because that just makes people feel a little the idea that this is not final version, it can change. And then once the pilot, you've learned what you have, you sort of iterate on it and then say, okay, now is the final sort of steady state version, right? And so I think in mentally, if you can, every time someone says, hey, I need this done, and this doesn't have to be like week, month-long phases, right? It could also just be a couple of days. But if you just break it down and say, this is how I work, I just think it helps you be strategic, because you'll always like force yourself to have that time up front to actually think through, why someone wants you to do something.
Yeah, awesome. I'm gonna pass actually over to Jess to ask the next set of really thought-provoking questions. Thanks so much, Rashi.
Yeah, Rashi, I'm curious. I would love to dive into the business acumen side of this a little bit more, because that's a side that I think in L&D we either don't focus on enough, or sometimes it sounds almost even scary, like we have to know how to read finance balance sheets or something. Can you talk about consulting as it pairs with business acumen, and specifically for L&D? How is that helpful or not helpful?
Yeah, so I think, and again, this is my perspective, where I think, you can have some impact without maybe fully having that business acumen, but I think it gets limited, right? And what I mean by that, and I know this, it may not be the answer people want to hear, but a mentor once told me that, look, irrespective of whatever function you're in, right? You could be in people, L&D, you could be in marketing. At the end of the day, that the C-suite and the CEO usually, and sometimes even the board, only cares about the CFO metrics, right? So fortunately, unfortunately, I would say, look, if you're working in traditional corporations, learning how to read financial statements, learning how to understand analyst reports about, this is what is moving our business, this is what our key competitors are doing, I think is helpful and important. The good news is it's 2025, and so I went to business school, but everybody doesn't need to go back. There are enough there are enough AI chatbots and agents out there, things like Perplexity, etc. Just Chat GPT, which can help you with this, right? Like you can kind of input a statement as long as you're kind of being, if your data, you need to obviously be confidential about it if it's a private company. But there's enough that can help you break it down and help you understand how to read it, right? So I'd say basic financial literacy, how to understand P&L statements, how to understand like revenue, right? Like how does your company make money? Like how does it build the product that it's selling? I think is really, really important to understand. And sometimes you don't have to kind of be the expert there. I would just say build relationships, right, with those sides of your org. Go get to know the leaders in those organizations. Go even ask them if you can shadow teams. Because unless you really understand what sort of truly moves the needle in the business, a lot of the insights that you'll share will remain very superficial, and people will always think of you as the person whose toolkit only has the learning hammer, and you come and you kind of wield it and then step away. Versus if you can kind of talk from a business point of view, and learning is one of those things in your toolkit, right? Like an in-person program is one of them, a job aid is one of them, something else is something. Then I just feel like you get more, you get people to trust you more across all these other parts of the business, and you get invited onto some of these strategic tables. And it also helps you translate impact into languages they understand, right? So instead of saying, hey, this drove engagement, or the NPS on this learning program was this much, like nobody really cares, right? Like at the end of the day, like you as the instructional designer probably love it, that people loved those 2 hours that they spent in your program. But your leader probably wants to know, hey, for our new hires, this reduced ramp up time by X%, and therefore they could go into the field by Y% less time. And therefore, them being on the field like 3 weeks early led to a, X dollar delta in sales, like just benchmarking and ballparking numbers. And that helps people grab their attention more than, this was a great onboarding experience.
It's really, I find it's really fascinating what happens when you speak the language of the people that you're working with instead of your language. Because I think, having grown up in L&D myself, we have our own language. We have our own acronyms we use. We have our own words. We throw them out. But those words don't mean the same thing to the business. And what you're talking about right now is not only just consulting and showing up with the great way to communicate. It's ensuring in a lot of ways that the train tracks meet in the middle and they don't go like this, like they're one's above the other. We got to meet people where they were at, and by using their language, it really helps to show that we're on their side.
100%.
And they listen a lot differently.
And the language, so just sorry, has to be changed. There's one for your stakeholders, but there's also one for the learners, and people sometimes forget that. That's what is it for me, the so what. And so I think it's also like a marketing brand advertising sort of mindset where you say, okay, I'm writing now a different copy so that it's very clear for Rashi as to what is the so what that I kind of pay you 2 hours of my time and attention to go through this, right? So I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just thought I wanted to bring that distinction clear, that the learning, the language that goes to your learners is not always equal to what goes to, say, the head of the department or the CEO.
Yeah, it just goes back to that basic concept of know your audience in a lot of ways and communicate in a way that they understand. So that includes business acumen, of course. I'm curious, Rashi, if you can give us something like really practical, because that's always fun for us to have a real life example. So can you tell us about one learning initiative you use to help fix a business problem, small or big? Tell us the situation. Give us a little story time, if you will.
Sure. And so this is actually still in the works, but I'll tell you the problem we were trying to fix, right? We're a large kind of global organization. We've got offices in close to, I guess, 130 odd different countries. And so the cohort that, becomes our kind of managers, both the first time and then all the way till they reach our company's sort of executive levels, that's the entire audience that I'm sort of responsible for across the world. And what we realized was um, that for a lot of these people, they're obviously time starved, extremely busy, and they need to
Mhm.
learn a lot of skills, right? Right from early on in their career, making that inflection from being individual contributors to first time managers. But then as they progress, towards the end, kind of picking up some new skills around opportunity creation, entrepreneurship, like really become trusted advisors to CEOs and clients. And we had really great programs for them, but they all seemed very disjointed. It almost felt
Mm.
like, it almost felt like if you were at a bank, right? And you would probably have like mortgage from the bank, a saving account, a checking account. You probably have a credit card. It almost felt like we had all these different teams which were throwing different things to them. And for the person on the other side, it felt very overwhelming. They just were not making enough time and energy to do this, and the whole connection to the so what for me was missing. So what we've basically done is that, we know that these programs work as programs. They don't need to be opened up and redesigned, but together as a journey, we need to create that cohesion, right? Like what I was saying, just
Mhm.
looking at it from your sort of audience point of view. So what we've kind of done is brought in a very kind of product management way of looking at this and completely reoriented the way our team operates and our team's operating model, where we've said that entire journey is our product, all these things under it, which we call programs or job aids, etc., or tools. I'm calling them like features, and those features can be switched on and off at a time, but all our impact, etc., is going to be tracked at this level. And so we've come up with like 5 big outcomes that we want people to achieve at the end of this journey, which directly sort of ties into things that they are evaluated on year end, and then we are working backwards from it. So this seems a little theoretical, and I obviously can't share specific details. It's still in the
Right.
we're still in the middle of doing things. But what we really did was we figured that, look, as individual solutions, these were really, really good. Where we were losing people was that sense of a journey that I am kind of progressing in my career. And so we completely changed the way our team worked, where we said instead of us kind of looking at things in a disjointed manner, program to program, we are going to tie all the impact and make sure things feel like they are progressing. So it almost feels to the end learner that they're part of this one cohesive experience where skills, everything sort of builds on top of each other, so that when they finally arrive at the destination, which is the end of this journey, and they're ready for their next promotion, they can step back and see how from day one over the period of 3 to 5 years, we've helped them acquire all those skills. And so, which is why they understand if they come for this program, they experience this, unlocks these 3 other things. They do that, then they go for the next one. So it's almost like creating these S curves for them versus a very kind of linear program centric view of the world.
Yeah, so the business problem you were working to solve was getting to promotion, but in a cohesive way.
And getting to skill development in a cohesive way across the
Ah.
world, right? Because it's also a
Hmm.
lot of like, there are a lot of skills that they need to pick up and pick up very, very fast. And the business problem really was like, how do we make sure that they're
Mm.
working at the pace of change, right? And
Hmm.
acquiring a whole host of these skills, right from building their own expertise to people management, to leading them their own selves, to like becoming entrepreneurs and working on clients and developing clients and getting business in. So it was a lot of these skills that these people have to acquire at a breakneck pace. And
Hmm.
how do we help them see that things build on top of each other, right? Versus them being, hey, come for like a 2 day learning program and leave. They couldn't see the value of doing that unless we
Hmm.
gave them this whole story.
Yeah, that one and done is really tricky. And I know, Rashi, you and I have talked about it before. I think you called it, and you said it earlier, create it in a black box and then throw it over the fence and let them run with it. But this way, it's much more something like that. You said something like that. But this way, it's much more cohesive. And I love that we're giving them the skills that they need and allowing them to develop them quickly because that's also a business problem everywhere. We got to keep up with this pace of change and these new skills. And
Exactly.
L&D, talent development, we're the ones to do that. But we've got to keep up and think a little bit differently about how we approach that.
Precisely.
So,
And this actually helps do that because you become responsible for that entire cohort. And
yes,
so I am invited onto all those tables to sit because I understand that cohort and nobody thinks of me as the person who owns like six of these global programs. It's like, no, this person actually owns all capability building for
yes.
this population. And that's
Mhm.
the big kind of difference we're trying to make internally with our own op model, right? So there are things within L&D we can change to become more strategic. It need not always be, hey, why doesn't the business look at us differently? It's also like just set your teams to be a little bit different.
Perfect. Well, we've got a couple questions coming in. And Rachel, I do want to get to yours, but since Sudeep just asked one that's relevant to what Rashi's talking about right in this moment, I'm going to build on that and start there, and then we'll go to Rachel's question, which is more about metrics. So, Rashi, Sudeep's question is, how are you designing these journeys to balance individual career paths versus impacting a lot of stakeholders overall to take them to the five learning outcomes? Is there a system in place? And if you need
Yes.
further clarification on that, let
I,
Sudeep know. We'll see if he can unmute.
Yeah, no, I think I get the first bit of it. When you say impacting a lot of stakeholders overall, are you just trying to say, Sudeep, that it feels like everybody's going through the same sort of journey and skill acquisition? Is that what you're trying to get at? Like, just help me unpack the second half of your question. I think the first half I get.
Sure. Thanks for taking the question, Jess, and thanks to Rachel to hold on. So, Rashi, great input. I think the way I was thinking about it is if your mandate was to impact, I don't know, all these stakeholders across a global organization, and overall you had five learning outcomes or five sort of, how would you say, places that you'd evaluate them at the end of the year, considering it's tied to their roles and what they're doing on a daily basis, how do you individualize or customize these learning pathways that you were talking of versus ensuring that, okay, everybody is impacted to achieve those five learning outcomes?
Yeah, so great question. These are not learning outcomes. So these are like five big buckets of like dimensions of skills that everybody in our organization. So if you think of a journey, right? A journey has an entry point and an exit point. For us, the entry point is pretty clear. They get promoted from individual contributors. And for us, the way I defined it, I said, what's the exit point? Three outcomes can take place. Either this person kind of gets promoted to the next level within our organization, or they get to change paths in our organization, or they get to leave the organization, right? The leave the organization, we were like, we can't do anything for both those. Change path is you could change paths at the same level. So you could say, I don't want to take the promotion. I just want to move laterally. Again, they're out of my journey and I can't control for when people exit that. But for us, luckily, like that inflection, we've got like a bunch of different paths, right? That people can be on in this entire band. But for us at that end, when they do go up for like their next designation promotion, there are these five big dimensions that we evaluate everybody on. And the double click for those looks a little different. So what we've done is we've said those are outcomes. There are these five big sort of skills or dimensions that we know everybody has to demonstrate. Now, the weightage of that differs, but has to demonstrate to move to the next path. And there was a lot of overlap in some of those for a lot of the paths, right? There are some bespoke needs that certain paths had. So what we've done is we've taken our journey and oriented it on these three S curves and said there's someone, there's early team lead, there's mid team lead, there's senior team lead. And we're helping them acquire those skills across those dimensions with, different programs, which could be in person with different job aids tools. And then for a few people where they need some bespoke expertise, etc., there is a certain team that gives them that, right? So, but the leadership skills, right? If you call the human skills, the leadership skills sort of remain consistent. The expertise is what changes. And so almost think of it that, the leadership skills are very consistent on those S curves, but then those expertise for your paths can be switched on and off depending on what you need. Some of it is asynchronous on-demand learning. Some of it is just a certain group bringing their people together and giving it to them. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but it's a little bit
It
of
does actually.
you've got.
Yeah, I think the part that really opened up for me was that it's not specific learning outcomes like tied to job roles, but it's a skill set that is a minimum threshold that you need to
100%.
achieve. And I think the other part that helped me understand it is that this is triggered by an inflection point of a change in career or a change in role. So very helpful. Thank you so much for taking my question.
Of course, happy to help.
Thanks, Rashi. So Rachel has a question about metrics. And the question is, how have you supported stakeholders to move towards metrics? Because she's found people to be wary at articulating where they want to get to, pinpointing data, even if she knows or wants to do this right at the start. So a little bit about metrics. If you need additional clarification, we can call on Rachel if she's able to unmute.
Rachel, maybe I do. When you're saying how have you supported stakeholders to move towards metrics, is it just getting them comfortable with the idea of like looking at certain numbers and saying whether there was impact or not, or what is the kind of question trying to get at?
It's getting them to identify specifically what they want to change. Because I work in this sort of quite soft skills management leadership space. And even if I know behind it probably is something around like employee turnover, even if it's something slightly softer like our employee engagement survey, they really don't want to put any kind of parameters around that, so that we can't, it makes it quite difficult then to evaluate really robustly and to dig into the problem and what's causing it.
Perfect. No, that's a great question. And I think so. This is something even from my world of advertising I learned, where sometimes attribution is very challenging. And I always tell stakeholders, look, like, yes, we will be data driven and we'll have numbers, but just because sometimes you can't have numbers to something doesn't mean it's not happening, right? And I think what we've done as a team to change it really is, as I said, I've restructured my entire team to think of things as like a cohort and a journey versus programs. So we obviously measure how things are happening in that program, but my focus is not to say people went for program A and within 90 days their communication skills got better. We're looking at a bunch of these skills for the entire cohort. And so one of the ways to do it is through their kind of formal evaluation. We do a lot of feedback, which is both upward feedback that teams give. You get a lot of client feedback on a bunch of their skills. It's looking at that as a whole and saying, in the last 6 months or in the last year, did this entire cohort move on these dimensions, right? And some of it, yes, could be attributed to the fact that they went to our program. We've done pilots where we've done A/B testing, where we took a bunch of people for a certain program. A few other people could not go for it because they got tenured out. And then we've been tracking this cohort to actually show that there's been changes on some of these sort of kind of human skills. But in a lot of cases, I also feel it's challenging where things like trust, psychological safety, communication, even someone's ability to problem solve. It's very hard to say they went for program A and therefore this happened, right? I think if you can kind of track it more in a time series kind of manner and say, we look at this cohort over 6 months, a year and a half, and look at it more 360, not just from the program, but how their teams kind of report back, how they self-evaluate themselves, how some of their other stakeholders kind of rate them on these skills. I think that you can sort of then make some attribution to some changes that took place in the programs you created.
Thank you, Rachel. One more question, Rashi, just came in from Teresha. I apologize if I said your name incorrectly, by the way. It's how do you balance building trust and rapport and moving strategically in fast-paced company, which I have a feeling is exactly where you sit. Teresha says, I find trust is built within L&D by gaining quick wins, proving your expertise, but then it puts you in a cycle of business always looking for a quick solution where learning is the answer. So are there other ways, in your experience, Rashi, you can show your expertise without moving quickly?
Yes. And so I mean, it's not something I came up with, but there's something called the trust equation, which I think is actually very, very interesting to think about, which actually says trust is equal to credibility plus reliability plus intimacy divided by self-orientation, right? And what that really means is trust is built on a bunch of different factors, right? It is how credible you are, right? Which means, do you have some expertise? Are you truly, the learning, the skill, the capability building kind of expert? Which comes back to, are you kind of developing yourself? Do you know what's happening in the market, right? Reliability, right? If you say you do something, and it need not be speed, it could also be that, hey, this is how I work. But if you really need me to do something in 2 weeks because it's burning, I will do it. It just increases reliability. People trust you because you're credible, plus you're reliable. And then the third thing that I said is intimacy, right? I think a lot of times people forget that trust is also built by building that human connection, right? So think of yourself as a peer and an equal. Whenever I meet a new client, and some of these clients were like at least 3 decades, my senior in the workforce, they had scary, big sounding titles, and they sometimes even now do. I would always go and approach them as peers, right? Just say, hey, like, yes, you have a problem, but even before the problem arises, do that little roadshow and get to know them as humans. Go out, have coffee with them, get to know who they are, what they're trying to do in their career, their hobbies, families, so that there is some sort of like intimacy. And I think all that plus increases your trust. It's not necessarily how quickly you churn things out. And a lot of us over-index on reliability, but it's also credibility plus intimacy. And then when I say low self-orientation, it also, when you're a client or advisor or like even say a doctor, it comes down from someone feeling like you're in there to help them. So it's a little bit of like, help me help you, versus them feeling like your agenda is just to get things from them, right? So people tend to trust people also who approach conversations with a little low self-orientation, approaching things with empathy, telling that, look, like, I understand that this is stressful for you, but I really need to like do this diagnosis to understand why this is needed, because if I don't, I could still create this intervention, and 3 weeks later we would have burned through a lot of time and resources, but the problem wouldn't go, right? And so it's a little bit of how do you develop a little bit of low self-orientation. So again, if I had to kind of summarize it, like the equation really is credibility plus reliability plus intimacy, sort of divided by self-orientation.
I had a thought there as well. So I really like the question and what Rashi said. So I often use two things. So I will say, see, there's just one execution. So I will say, let's do this in chunks or phases. So what I'm doing is not a quick win necessarily. I'm just delivering the more short-term results. And then I will say in phase one, in phase two and three, we can, if you want further growth, then this is what it will look like. So just as an example, so I do some work with the property company, and we're trying to help. We're trying to go from helping 4,000 homeless tenants to helping 5,000. And so there's some immediate quick wins we can do, like short-term shelter and accommodation, but that's not good because actually what we really want to do is help them live an independent life, and short-term shelter is not about becoming independent. So we actually want to do is get more properties and have more property managers. So there's that middle management capability development that is being put off by the company because they think it's a long-term thing. But if I connect the short term with the long term, they say, okay, so let's do both. Let's do short term shelter because we need to get homeless people off the streets. That's really, really important. But the second thing that we'll do in phase two is we need to move towards property managers, building their capability, as well as more long term homes that we can actually acquire and buy. And for that, we need investment funds and all that kind of stuff. So hopefully that gives you more other business sense as well of how you could connect a short term, probably just not even use the word quick win, probably short term results with a long term result. That helps.
Yeah, I find Saad similarly, if there's something I can do within that request to set myself up to work more strategically in the long term. And I have used the phased approach before as well, where, all right, you need to stop the bleeding. We'll stop the bleeding. But if we stop the bleeding, here's what I'm going to ask for in return. So for example, I'm going to ask to do an analysis after the fact, where we can make sure this really is the best solution. And, depending on the level of trust and influence you have with that stakeholder, you might be able to do that. I have been able to do it in the past, and that then has lengthened that time from coming and just saying, I want a quick win, give me this, to, oh my gosh, can I bring you in a little earlier? Can you help me to problem solve? So there are some things you can do even within that request instead of trying to start outside of it. Anything you would add to that, Rashi?
No, I think both great points. And yes, like I again fully empathize that in a lot of cases, making the switch suddenly is also really hard. If they've seen you a
Yeah.
certain way, I
Hmm.
understand it has to be gradual, right? My only kind of nudge was there are lots of other ways you unlock sort of trust with the stakeholders, and it's not always just how fast you can get things done.
Yeah, I would agree. Well, thank you, everyone. And those are great questions, Saad. I know you've got a couple things. And look, we're like 3 minutes past when you promised the drop of this resource. So that's my fault. I kept us talking, but
No, you
you
keep
take it from
going.
here.
I'll be frantically fixing spelling errors, which someone pointed out to me in the actual document. So we are good to go. But we've got chance for one more final question if anybody wants to ask before I go live with this consultancy guide, which I'm sure you've all been waiting eagerly for. Any final thoughts or questions? Sonia's nodding her head. So it's like, show me the money,
We're
show
waiting.
me the
We're
guide.
waiting for the guide, Saad.
I know. All
God.
right. So look, let's go. I'm just waiting for it to be downloaded from Canva. Just give me a second. And
Okay.
this is literally hot off the press, guys. So
What are we
we
going to
set.
find in it?
Say that again.
What are we going to find in it,
So,
Saad?
good point. So while I'm doing that, that's a good way to keep the momentum going. I love that tactic. So what you're going to find is the five consultancy areas, and I'm actually going to share my screen now. So bear with me. I'm going to let you play around with it. So let me just share this in the chat now. Fingers crossed this is the correct version. So it is just literally sending, and I'm going to share my screen because I want to give you a quick whistle stop tour. Firstly, massive shout out to Rashi for bloody hell. I mean, that was such a good, thought-provoking session. Uh, uh, big up yourself, Rashi.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you for having me.
absolute pleasure, absolute pleasure. Okay, so I'm just gonna hit the share button. Hopefully you can all see my screen. Yeah, can you see my screen? Yeah, okay, not head. Great, fantastic. All right, so here is it's a first edition. We've tried to put it together to help as many people in the profession as possible. So what can you expect inside it? It's a collection of different cheat sheets on how do we talk about management consulting and the five consultancy areas to master. Problem statement is one of the five areas, and you won't be surprised given Rashi's extensive focus and guidance to us to focus and stay on the problem space. How to measure impact with a case study. We've got questions and worksheets. So it will be a whistle stop tour for 3 minutes, but feel free to go through it in your own time. So here are the five consultancy areas that we think that what's great about this. How often have you had a C leader say, hey, we want to, launch a new market, launch a new product, or we want to grow, and there's no kind of focus on timelines, execution, the clarity. And so we think if you develop these five areas, which interestingly enough, you don't have to be a learning specialist or any specialist to do it. Being able to figure out a great problem, look at its implications, develop what we call scoreboards, which we've got examples of, and learn how to do health checks, which is effectively measuring the impact. You can do this without having to have learning expertise, and it helps you be business first. So we define what they are. We give you a source of where business problems or opportunities can come from. So, they come from three areas, right? So it can come from a reactive course request, which many of us are in that third bucket, right? We get a course request, hey, communication skills training for our, customer service managers with no real background or context. And there are two other ways in which you can really start to become a strategic partner and move away from that order taker. But I love the phrase that Jess used as well, working from within inside what you've gotten. That third bucket is still really relevant. So we give you some examples. We help you understand how to draft a problem statement with this really great color-coded template. So I won't go through the details, but you'll have a look at it. One of the consistent case studies, we've got lots of different mini examples, but you won't be surprised that I've based it. There's a common case study on Conway housing, because I've got expertise in the housing industry and some others, but I'm fascinated by this housing industry. And so you will see we've taken Conway housing throughout the consultancy guide, and we've tried to apply different stages of those five consultancy areas. So scoreboards, we've developed it for Conway Housing. we've shown you metrics on how we developed it for Conway Housing. So I'm actually going to skip straight to, so here's the email request, right? And you'll see what that looks like. You'll see how the conversation, how to move away from asking what we call generic questions and all questions to drip feeding your questions and asking really smart, targeted, business-specific questions that are specifically given to you for sale. So you can use them and you can take them away. More on the case study. Yeah, so yeah, this is the example of very specific questions. So instead of asking, what's the driver behind, what's the problem? What if we don't do this? That's very generic. And you can start with that, but I think we need to really drill down into some of the more specific questions that are tailored to the teams we partner with. So some of you partner with very specific teams, tech teams, customer service teams. Some of you sit across the whole business. Just pick one partner, one department that you regularly engage with, or a recent request you've got, and you can try asking them some really great questions like this. I'm really interested in helping you understand the difference between a KPI and a target. Won't go into it now, but it's a really great way of looking at it. You've got the 4D target method that will actually help you set a target. Because one of the biggest challenges that we have, a lot of the businesses, to say, hey, we want to improve our conversion, but they don't tell you what that is. If it's 7% conversion now, what does it need to be like? Because if I don't know if it's going to go from 7 to 10%, I can't tell you whether my training will contribute to that increase or not, because we don't even know what the increase we're going for. We don't know what that target is, right? If you're looking at a sales example, and if you're looking at customer satisfaction, if you're on 73%, where do we want to end up, right? And then I can perhaps start to explore with you how much the training could contribute or not contribute once we know what the difference is in between. So we've got that. Here's an example of a scoreboard that we give you in terms of how it works. And this is the bit that I'm really interested in. We finally show you how to actually, so there is no learning ROI. There's only business ROI. There's only business metrics. That's a bit of a thought-provoking challenge, right? So don't look at, as we've said, attendance sheets and stuff like that. So what do we look at? And you will see how in the case study, the business is trying to improve repair time. So it currently takes 14 days to repair a property and we have 700 of them. And they want to decrease that. They want to do it faster. They want to repair a property. If you've got a leak in your roof, we want to get to you quicker and faster, right? And what we want to be able to also do is reduce the complaints that we are getting from tenants that is taking too long to repair. So the overall complaints has gone high. So we help you understand here with this one mini example how you can actually move away from looking at course-based metrics, training-based metrics, to actually looking at the real business metrics, which in this case are property repair time and complaints. And it will all make sense once you sort of go through it. We give you lots of different templates, more resources, how to write KPIs. There's a great by Cascade on how to write KPIs, and some other tips as well in terms of how to deal with objections. So when you get, rejected and you work on something for 3 months and then all of a sudden someone says, your C leader says, hey, sorry, we're not doing that anymore. But it'd be good to know that in advance, C leader. But it'd be great to give you a really practical case study of how you can adapt your language with them. And there's a final worksheet on how you can start to apply this for yourself. So very fast, whistle stop tour. I'll take a breather myself. So please do explore that. Give me feedback. We would love to actually improve this in the second edition. Are there any thoughts or any comments there? Okay, the meeting schedule is about to end. Thank you for that, Fireflies. Okay, great. Well, I hope that you found that useful. Thanks so much once again, Rashi, for taking us on such a thought-provoking dialogue. Thanks again, Jess, for being a great co-host.
Of course.
And we shall see everyone at the next workshop. Take care. See
Thank
you later.
you.
You all.
Bye-bye. Maybe you can stay on, Rashi and Jess. We can have a nice little catch-up. Thanks, Amito. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, everyone. I want to stop recording.